Hi, welcome to another House of PMO session, and we're in a different place today. We're actually at the second HQ of House of PMO. This is the nerve centre of all the knowledge forming and information gathering. So we are here in this session talking about something called POOs and POTs. Now, we've been asked to do this because I think what's happened over the years is that I and I just talk about POOs and POTs as if it's completely normal.
Absolutely.
And,
who doesn't talk about POOs?
And it's obviously not completely normal, but you know, it's so of House of PMO and PMO flash mob and all that kind of stuff. Where we've come from is all about hearing, you know, what people are doing in the real world. And one of the things that you will not, and I'm guaranteed you will not find any of this in any kind of theoretical stuff, any training materials, nothing. However, it is one of the most common occurrences that you will get in PMO, and that's POOs and POTs. So, put us out of this misery. What we're going to be looking at around POOs and POTs.
So there's four things, and I was just saying to Lindsay before we started, there are four section headers I never thought I'd actually kind of put in a presentation. So I'm going to talk about what are POOs and POTs, and then POO and POT characteristics, and then I'm going to talk about some typical POOs. So these are POOs that I have known, that I have met with, talked with, and worked with over the years. You might find that you know something similar, you work in something similar. So we are going to talk about some perhaps some of the challenges that those POOs face, and some of the tactics that they might want to kind of pick up on. And then finally, we're going to talk how you move from a POO to a POT, and then how POTs move to infinity. So actually kind of just moving out from being a POT. So
yeah. So it sounds ridiculous, but is absolutely serious behind it. So
I think there's a lot of people in POOs and POTs. Yeah. So let's get on and have a look at kind of what POOs are. And it's an acronym that we created several years ago now, and as Lindsay said, we use it quite a lot. So a POO is essentially a PMO of one. So there are lots of people out there who we meet and we say, we are the PMO, we are it. That's it. That's all they have in the organisation. They have a single person. And what's fascinating is those individuals can be administrators, right up to very senior people in the organisation who are contributing to the delivery of projects and programmes in that organisation. And then occasionally we also come across POTs, which are PMOs of 2 or 3. So this is where they have 2 or 3 people. And again, the amazing thing about POTs is the diversity of the people who we have in those POTs as to how junior, senior, or the combination of people that we have. So we're going to talk a bit about POOs and their challenges. We're going to talk about as we go from a POO to a POT, and then as we go on a POT into the wider journey, and see ourselves as a more established PMO. But I have to say, it is perfectly normal in organisations for the POO to stay as a POO. If you've got a small organisation and it's focused on one particular area, we're not saying all POOs need to move to POTs and POTs onwards, but it's just interesting in terms of what that journey might look like. If that's what's right for your organisation, we would never condone doing stuff just because the textbooks say so. It has to be based on your organisation's need.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that we hear a lot from in terms of members that are working in these sides of PMOs is, how do you do it all? You know, that's the biggest challenge, and things that people are trying to overcome. And Eileen's going to show us a little bit more about why actually a PMO of 1 or 2 or 3 can achieve a lot.
Absolutely. So let's have a look at some POO and POT characteristics, and some of the things that we're going to look at. We're going to look at the context, the purpose of that PMO, whether it's service or support based, and also in terms of the resourcing. So when we talk about the context, so you'll remember P3O and in the competence framework, we talk about whether it's a project office, a programme office, a portfolio office, or a centre of excellence. and whether we're actually in an organization where there's one PMO, or actually there's kind of multiple PMOs across the organization, because in some organization there's a POO or a POT and that's it. There's nothing else at all in the organization. And in other organizations, there's lots of POOs and POTs across the organization. So again, we're going to talk about kind of what the implications of that might be. One of the important things, and again, we talk about it when we're setting up a PMO, is actually we're usually set up, hopefully we've been set up with a particular purpose in mind. So we will have some stakeholders. Now, again, depending on kind of what our context is, might change what that vision is for that PMO. And that vision might be, kind of, well, we just need some stuff, but it's not always kind of well articulated. And the stakeholders can range from senior board executives down to project and program managers, project team members, or even kind of some business as usual resource managers or kind of resource owners who are losing, as they would say, losing their staff to deliver on projects and really disrupting business as usual. So interesting kind of range of stakeholders, and we'll talk about how we address those. Now, unsurprisingly, we've picked from a resourcing perspective, I've put the 4 levels that we've got on the competence framework: administrator, analyst, manager, and director. And the most interesting bit around this bit is typically the names is almost irrelevant. They can be called anything, but it's almost kind of irrelevant to what they do. So you'll know in the House of PMO Essentials courses, we've got the administrator, analyst, manager and director. And we've had people kind of attend those courses. And so they've gone on the PMO Administrator course. And when you speak to them and you realise they are it, they are the POO, you suddenly realise actually they're doing a bit of an analyst. They're really struggling to do a bit of manager because they're trying to work out what the PMO should do and how it's done. They often kind of don't do the director bit, but certainly if I'm there as an analyst, I'm definitely doing some manager stuff, and I may well be doing some kind of PMO director stuff as well. So it's always quite interesting in terms of POOs and POTs, really make those kind of job roles elastic. And very often we see this lovely word, PMO Lead. And that covers a multitude of sins in terms of kind of what's expected. And again, the competency framework is great for you to kind of go and use those role descriptions and actually work out, well, what is it? What kind of job am I doing? And try to kind of manage it so it's kind of within your kind of skills and capability. And the important thing is, and we'll cover that when we kind of go through each of those, is to start thinking about, well, if I'm a PMO administrator, I'm asked to be doing some PMO analyst activity and possibly even some manager activity. Where am I going to get some support from? Where am I going to get some learning from and some development from in order to kind of help me kind of step up to that role, or actually have a conversation and get some other support from around the organisation? And again, we're going to be looking at whether those PMOs are service-based, i.e. they have a service catalogue and they've got kind of defined list of things that they do, or they're kind of support based and they're very much kind of, well, you do whatever's asked on the day or the week or the month. So planning is quite difficult, resourcing is kind of quite difficult. And I think, kind of, even though we're going to talk through it for each of them, almost without exception, the POOs are very much kind of support based. They've usually been established to do a particular thing, but that thing, whatever that is, kind of can encompass lots of other activities that aren't planned for. There's no process about, there's no templates, and they really kind of, even when they start to get established, it is really kind of struggling. So very much kind of going to be around that support base, but we'll cover that off. So here we go. Typical POOs and POOs I have known. Now, interesting, I was just trying to think back if ever I'd been a POO, and I don't think I ever have, though I have worked with many and I've met many. I've definitely been a POT and grown a POT into a larger kind of PMO in a bigger structure, but I've never actually kind of been a POO, so I kind of hold my hand up to that. But as I said, I've supported and coached and worked with an awful lot of POOs, and obviously when I have those kind of joy of doing any course delivery, I meet lots of POOs, and we meet lots of flash mob, and we've had lots of conversations around that as well. So I think I've picked 5 POOs that I have known. I'm not going to name anybody. And so interesting, when we go through this, you might say, well, actually, Eileen, I don't recognise that. And that's absolutely fine, because you might know something similar, and we're also interested in if you've got a poo you'd like to share with us, or you are a poo and you want to kind of talk a bit more about kind of what's involved and your challenges. More than happy for you to kind of join in the conversation, and we can kind of expand this. But also, I think it's quite good within the House of PMO that we almost have a kind of a connection. We might actually kind of create PMO toilet where all the poos can go and speak to each other. But yes, but we might have a PMO room where we can actually kind of go and have some of those chats. It can go too far, can't we?
We can indeed. An analogy can just stop right there. But
absolutely.
One of the interesting things about this is that you might look at this title and think, well, that's not me, because we have we're in a large organisation, it's a large PMO. You've always got to remember, but you're never going to be necessarily working for the same place your entire career. And this might be one of the things that you take on in the future. So you might be delving in later on in your
career. I think the other thing is as well, when I was kind of pulling some of these slides together, I think particularly when we talk about kind of some medium-sized organisations, the number of people we meet who are in a PMO, a kind of relatively well-established PMO, and we start saying, do you have any other PMOs across the organisation? They say, well, I do, but I don't know what they do, and I don't have any connection to them. So actually, you may find around your organisation there's some POOs and POTs. So actually kind of going through this might give you some really good ideas in terms of how you can actually kind of support them in their challenges of being a POO and a POT.
Bring them into the fold.
Absolutely. So let's start with the first one. As I said, we're going to talk about the context, the purpose, all of those kind of elements we talked about, and then any challenges and tactics for that particular PMO. So let's have a look at the first one, and I call this the CEO sidekick, so the Chief Executive sidekick. So we often have individuals who are potentially executive assistants or PAs to the Chief Executive. And projects have started to appear because we now know that every organisation has something about a project. We might have special projects, but there's definitely some activity that actually through normal kind of business management information, business reporting kind of just doesn't fit. And so often the kind of the PA, the executive assistant gets told, well, can you just go and work with the kind of these special projects and start bring me some kind of reporting, get some update on a weekly or a monthly basis. So typically kind of a monthly basis, along with the kind of any other month-end reporting. So typically it's resourced by a PA or a PMO administrator. They're definitely not a PMO analyst. They don't necessarily recognise themselves as a PMO, or they're just starting to twig that there's a PMO. We have had a couple of people actually who have been asked at this level to say, can you set up a PMO, which is also quite interesting for them to be able to do. So that's kind of the context we're looking at. And so they kind of come into this where they actually have no real understanding of what a PMO is. They may not necessarily have any kind of project management background. And so their real challenges are about kind of, well, what data to collect? Yes, where to get it from, what format to put it in. And the real challenges is that they don't often know what to do with that data, or one of the things we talk about in PMO is about, it's not just about collecting data, it's about doing a story around the data and providing that update. And so potentially the person who gets to do this is producing numbers and words that actually kind of they have very little understanding on, and even when they're collecting information from fellow directors or fellow managers, they're really struggling to kind of ask the questions or validate that information. So it really is little more than a data collection, which kind of thing can be sometimes not much fun. It doesn't feel as though I'm really adding any value in that kind of particular role. And the danger is, as soon as you kind of start talking projects, that all of a sudden people expect you to do a little bit more than just reporting. So the people who are doing the projects may be kind of senior managers, and they see the kind of the chief exec and you as kind of reporting into the chief exec as somebody who can provide some more help, kind of what information they want. Do you have some templates for this? And all of a sudden, yes, you end up kind of trying to expand your reporting role to something a little bit more than reporting.
I think at this level too, because it is obviously a lower level of maturity, because for an organisation this is probably dipping their toes into you know, having some kind of doing something around projects, and quite potentially for the first time. So I mean, it's one of the interesting, just recently, one of the conversations I had about with this kind of thing, with reporting, like you say, there's numbers and things. However, sometimes when you're working with people within the business, and you may, you know, be a PA or a PMO administrator, often you get given things, and you've got to take it as being, well, that's the truth. Might not necessarily be the truth, because again, it comes back to, you know, your own level of knowledge around project management is very low at this level, you know, it's an interesting start in life, I think, with this in many organisations. But you know, but it is the reality. These are who you have known, and I have certainly known them as well.
Yeah, and they come up and they're really struggling, because the expectation is they can set up a PMO by their, you know, by their chief execs who've got, you know, kind of, it's the blind leading the partially sighted a lot of the time, you know, and really struggle in terms of what that means. Yeah. And I would say kind of growing knowledge of project management and PMO is a really good start. And much as we're not here to sell courses, the House of PMO Essentials for PMO Administrators is a really good way to understand what she's looking at now. She's getting my kind of the competency framework, but actually kind of getting to know, getting to understand the project context. And if you're kind of involved in kind of monthly reporting about business as usual, actually being able to kind of understand what the differences are with projects and programs allows you a little bit more kind of confidence that actually the data that you're collecting. And my other kind of advice for these kind of POOs is start simple. Don't try to do, and again, some people who kind of work in that organization, and not every organization has really good culture and behaviors, may suddenly come with, well, we've got this kind of, I've got this template I've used in a previous organization, it's 3 pages long, and you kind of think, actually, let's kind of take kind of baby steps and actually kind of work with some kind of key data to try and actually kind of get us into a point where we've got some level of consistency around that.
Yeah.
And I really feel for these people who, you know,
I feel for them. However,
it's a great opportunity.
It is a great opportunity, and you know, if you've been working, you know, around, like you say, as a CEO psychic, normally it's a business administration type role. Yes. This is a great opportunity to get into projects, and a lot of people will kill for that opportunity. So you know, it's sometimes, yeah, it's an interesting place to be. So that's one POO then.
Let's have a look at our next one. So this is where we've got a small company, so not a huge company, and we've got a small PMO, and somebody has been appointed, and often this person, we've got just a single PMO in the company, and they may be, and we had somebody today we were talking to who was a PA to the projects director. So they're in the position where they actually kind of know a bit about projects anyway, because of the environment they're working in. And they're there to kind of help projects, or always reporting, because that always is something that you have to do. So essentially the PA got a different position now, because you're now in a position where you're actually kind of in an organisation that understands projects. So again, pulling together that information on a regular basis and help projects, which I always think is a kind of, and I've got this in a few of the POOs, because it's completely undefined, which is why we're back to that kind of support base. And if it's a service administrator, it may start doing the administration, the project administration role, which might include the secretariat stuff. And as we've said several times, you know, people get really kind of pretty about, oh, we're not there to do administration. Actually, we are. It's just we're there to do a lot more as well. And so I never want to decry PMO administration as a really important role that some PMOs can undertake. But I think this kind of help projects, and again, because you're seen to have the ear of somebody who's in charge of the projects, you get asked to do a number of other things as well. So, you know, if I'm having a problem with a particular issue, then actually I may be asked to kind of, can you get some help on this? Do you know who I can speak to? So very much kind of some other aspects. So in terms of you know, kind of where we go with this, is that actually for this individual, this POO, it's really about, where do we get our best practice from? Is it from a textbook? Is it from kind of the project manager we were talking to yesterday? Is it from the project executive? So it's really difficult to kind of really get a kind of a clear picture, and you're driven by doing lots of different things. And I think particularly I've got this in as a PMO administrator level, you almost have got so little influence Yes, about how things are done, because you're there, you're the support person, and therefore you're not at that position where you can kind of provide advice and guidance. And so every time you start a new project, you're doing something different. Every new project manager comes along, they've got a different way of doing things, and you end up kind of being pulled from pillar to post. And I think this kind of person sometimes really struggles to get any personal support. So from the, even, if you've got a good projects director, they're still kind of, their focus is across all of those projects, but actually for you as an individual and how to get better and kind of your self-esteem is actually kind of quite difficult. And so I really think, for this kind of this kind of person who's in this position, actually build an external network. Now we have people who come who are really nervous about coming to a PMO, a House of PMO event, because I think everybody's there is going to be project director and a PMO manager, and little old me is kind of doing this little job, and kind of I don't really feel as though I know a lot. And actually this is exactly the type of person that we set up the House of PMO for, as well as all of the rest, is actually to kind of come in to the House of PMO, meet some other people. You'll find lots of other people who might even be in a pot or a bigger PMO, who might still have some of these kind of same challenges, about people who understand the day-to-day basis. And I think even though we're not at the point here of building a service catalogue, but I think trying to drive a level of consistency, so starting to kind of recognize, well, actually, if this project manager is doing risk management and this project manager is doing risk management, actually perhaps when the next project manager comes along, I might with a little bit more confidence be able to say, well, this is the risk register template we would normally use, or ones that's developed or that's been useful in this organization. So you can start building some kind of repeatable kind of processes, which allows you then to kind of, it's less hard work every time a new project comes along, and you start to kind of, and what happens over time is people start recognize, oh, Lindsay's got one of those templates. I'm sure last time I started a project, Lindsay had one that I could use to, and you start to build up some of your kind of credibility as project support.
Yeah. So a question that we got. So what is the difference between somebody who's coming in to the organisation to support probably maybe a single project or two projects, and something like a PMO-of-One? What's the difference here?
So I think the interest, if you come in and just kind of do one particular project, you tend to be reporting into the project manager, who probably has some very defined ideas in terms of how they want things done. And because you're not supporting any of the projects, and that you don't have to worry about kind of doing it differently on another project, you're there for a period of time, and you will take your lead from the PMO, the project manager, the program manager, that's fine. I think the challenge comes is where you've got a PMO who's looking after multiple projects, where there's no consistency across the organisation.
And that's the difference that we're talking about, is this is a small company that has got, at least a good handful of projects with different project managers delivering those projects.
And I think the other thing, just in terms of this kind of building consistency, and much as I've written the best practice and we continue to support it, I wouldn't even worry about it being best practice at this point. Kind of focus on the kind of consistency, and then we can gradually kind of go with the continuous improvement to embed more best practice into that. And and once you're seen to be kind of custodian of those templates, you can start kind of actually as you kind of work through the projects, as I say, kind of increase the kind of the formality of some of those. But I think after that, we may end up in this kind of position. Now, you'll see that this one is the very similar thing. The difference is the experience of the person who's doing this role. Yes, so absolutely exactly the same. You've got a single PMO, a single person PMO who's supporting multiple projects. Absolutely, they're doing the reporting, but also helping projects. Okay, but you're not a project manager, but you're there kind of doing support based. So challenges for these people is your agenda is driven by best practice. So if you've come in as a PMO person, and assuming you've been given that position and people know you as somebody who knows a bit about stuff, the idea is that they don't know what they don't know. And therefore that the person, particularly if they've not had a huge amount of experience, the stakeholders aren't intelligent enough to be able to say we want this and that. And so what we find is that the agenda is often driven by best practice. So you've had somebody who's been on a Prince 2 course, they've been on an MSP course, and they know what best practice is. They've not had a huge amount of experience in like 3 or 4 or 5 different PMOs. So they kind of know the one way of doing things. And, they've been in an organization where that one way has worked before. And when you do this job, and I moved from a big organization as somebody who worked in a PMO into a position where I was actually the PMO manager. And I thought, actually, this is a great opportunity. There's only me and one other person, but I can kind of shape it. And then you really quickly learn that actually, the things that you've used in other organizations don't work in this organization. That is a learning that hopefully kind of the message is getting out there. And I think the other thing is as well, we talk in P3 about doing both support services and assurance services. So support services are all of the things that kind of help. The assurance services are those that kind of just people kind of start constraining what people do, and they're not interested in that. Yes, they don't want to be told you have to do this, you must do that, you cannot do that. So they'll take all of the help you can give, but anything that's kind of going to restrict how they're delivering their projects, and they'll quite happily kind of sidestep any process if they can, not out of maliciousness, just after general speed and desire to get their project delivered.
Small companies tend to be wanting, being nimble and, quicker to market and all of those benefits over the larger companies, and that it will be shown the fact that they don't want that so much of the assurance side of it.
So there's a real kind of challenge there in terms of actually getting processes that are based on best practice, that are kind of fit for purpose. And I think it's really interesting in terms of about engaging and educating the kind of the broader stakeholders about what the PMO is there to do, to try and get beyond the reporting here and helping projects in terms of kind of what specifically are the difficulties that we're trying to achieve, what are the best ways to make the projects more efficient in this organization. And I think in terms of kind of moving from just kind of knowing a bit about projects to actually demonstrate your credibility as a project manager. Now, we talk about this often, isn't it? As we introduce new things into the PMO, we should be using the project management processes and being an exemplar and demonstrating how they work. So if I'm introducing a new service, I can do that using project management. We did a talk last week at BCS talking about getting into project management. And you can use project management skills and capabilities to do anything from kind of cooking lunch to cooking a holiday. We all know those examples of kind of weddings and all of the rest of it. But actually being able to demonstrate how you can use the processes, procedures, the tools and templates in that organization and demonstrate that actually the processes help will build your kind of credibility. And rather than kind of dive into doing kind of big kind of assurance and kind of health checks on the projects and kind of doing that to them, perhaps what we can do is actually create some simple checklists that we give to the project managers and say, look, this will really help you. If you just make sure in your project plan, you've got a list of all of the activities, you've got dependencies, you've got some key resources, and you can tick all those boxes, actually, you'll be in a good place. So again, we're not doing it to them, but we're helping them actually kind of put those right things in place. And we've done a bit about checklists and how important they are.
Yeah.
And there is, have I got, yes, no, there is the book. It's the beauty of kind of standing in front of the library. Yes, there is a great book called The Checklist Manifesto, which is worth a read.
Yeah. And the other thing here, you've got to remember that there's a reason why you're there, is that the company needs some kind of structure around what is now emerging, projects that they've not done before and not had this approach before. So really everybody is on the same journey with the, hopefully going for the same goals and outcomes. And sometimes, you just need occasional reminders along the way that PMO is not there to stop, we're there to enable. And and sometimes it's also the fact that it's a journey for all of you as well. This is not about the PMO doing things to people.
So I have to say,
working it out together.
I did in one of the PMOs that I used to work in, we had a little logo for our PMO, which was a kind of a hand. We would describe ourselves as the iron fist in a velvet glove. So we would feel quite kind of soft and tactile. However, if things didn't go in the right direction, there was very definite kind of pressure. It wasn't a fist. Yes, it was an iron. Well, we call it iron fist, but it was. But we kind of moved things in the right direction. I think kind of so starting with some simple checklists is a really good way to start saying actually we can get better at this, but it's kind of almost kind of help themselves. So this is when we were doing the introduction, said actually you may be in an organisation where you're not in a POO, but actually there's some other POOs around the organisation. And so this is a slightly different scenario where we've got one of many PMOs around the organisation, and typically we see these set up in departments.
Yeah.
So the HR department may have somebody who kind of, again, back to reporting, because they're always going to be doing that for the manager. Interestingly, when we get to departments, what we start seeing is resource management, because as I mentioned earlier, the manager of the department, the team leads of the department saying, you know, we kind of do everything. We've got our day job, and these projects seem to be taking over lots of our time. And again, we were talking to somebody last week who said, not only that, is that other departments have got projects and expect us to work on their projects. So we want some visibility of kind of what's happening with the resources. And again, back to this kind of help projects, which is, you know, kind of the great old saying. And I've said here, we've got a kind of PMO analyst lead. Now, we may have a PMO administrator in here, but more typically is somebody who, again, might start off as the executive assistant, but is actually going to be the person who's kind of going to be overseeing these on behalf of the department manager, or the department or the divisional manager or director. Now, interestingly, they don't necessarily have any say in individual projects, but they may well be the person who actually makes the call in terms of which resources get allocated to which particular project or program that's required. And even if they don't kind of make those decisions, they'll certainly be the person who facilitates the conversation. So if Lindsay is a kind of one of the team leaders and has 3 staff, and I'm sitting there as the PMO analyst, the PMO lead, somebody's come to the department and said, we need somebody to work for kind of 3 days a month on this project. It would be me who goes to Lindsay and said, which one of your staff do you want? And then I would kind of be that kind of intermediary to make sure that we had that kind of consistent picture of how resources are used across the different projects. And you'll be surprised at how many departments actually have this issue. I do not. I've done a lot of these in kind of almost in kind of professional bodies. I've done it for a few professional bodies where they're doing projects, or charities where they're getting money from external sources, and they're not there to do kind of big, you know, the formality's not there, but they want to do lots of things, and they really just don't know how to kind of organise themselves and them time. So this is surprisingly, resource management is a challenge, and you know, we're not here to talk about kind of resource management and give you all of the answers. There's a whole, I think we need to put a series together on resource management, because
quite a lot in the library as well. So yeah, want to go digging in there.
The you know, kind of the whole resource management issue is a challenge about just putting in some kind of processes around that, making sure that, you know, people make the right decisions. But I think the other challenge that we have at this level, where we're talking about departmental PMOs, is that the people who are delivering those projects are what we call accidental project managers. So they do have a day job, but they've been given this piece of work that actually they are asked to deliver, and it's called a project. So welcome to the world of, and I've forgotten the name of the program now, with Alan Sugar.
Oh, The Apprentice.
Welcome to The Apprentice, yes. So you've got this piece of work that might need 2 or 3 people, and it's called a project, but we haven't really got a project management process or a standard. All of the kind of the real project managers over there somewhere who are doing kind of strategic change and kind of corporate projects are kind of way out of our league. And so what do we do in our kind of little area here? And I do think there is there's some few things we can do. And it's about kind of just introducing some minimum standards, yes? So just some kind of key documentation. And, you know, I'm not advocating a 12-page template, just a 1-page summary of what we want. And again, you're going to find real challenges around kind of estimating. So people, you know, kind of people who timesheet down to half an hour, you know. I always often talk about my son's girlfriend, who she's a lawyer, and she timesheets down to every 8 minutes. Really at kind of this level. Half a day is about, you know, kind of really what we're talking about. So some minimum standards around the project, some information that we can hold. And certainly I would suggest Excel, you know, some good Excel skills really help in terms of being able to kind of picture where people are. And I think we talked last week at last week's webinar about kind of making sure that the decisions can go down to the actual kind of people like Lindsay, who are the line manager of the resources, rather than me and the PMO saying, Lindsay, I'm taking Joe off you for 3 days next week because he's working on a project. So kind of clear working with those resource managers.
Yeah, so check that out in the library under the we did a House of Genius session, and it's all around resource management and some ideas in there.
Yes, absolutely. So that's February 2023 in there. The other thing is network internally. Even though, you know, those big strategic projects might feel, you know, kind of completely different to what we're doing, they will have some of those kind of similar challenges. And I've written there, steal and share. Yes, we always used to kind of steal with zeal, you know, kind of use some of them. You might have to kind of scale them down for what's right for these particular projects because they're smaller than those other projects. But actually, you might find some friendly people in some of those other PMOs who might help you do that kind of tailoring. So we've previously talked about if I'm the only one and there's no other PMOs to do some network externally. I still think networking externally in the House of PMO obviously helpful of that, but actually network internally, because what you're going to be using then is processes, systems and tools, techniques that are already known around your organisation.
Yeah, and what I would say is that one of the lesser known secrets around PMO is that we quite often steal stuff, because PMOs, you know, it's been, we met over 20 years ago when there was nothing out there for people. There is a lot of stuff out there now. There's been people that have been in this situation before. We've certainly got a lot of resources and insights, but, you know, these things have been put in place many times in organisations, and none of this is secret. There are things out there that, you know, so steal, what would you say? Steal
with zeal.
Right, there you go.
I think just a word of caution, there is also a lot of charlatans out there. So some of the stuff you find, if you kind of just type into LinkedIn or kind of Google or other search engines are available, kind of find me this. Just be careful and make sure that what you're getting. And again, what we're trying to do at kind of House of PMO is trying to curate and make sure that the stuff that we're providing has been tried and tested before it's out there. But certainly if you're kind of in a medium-sized company with lots of other PMOs around the organisation, just go and kind of make some friends in there as well. And then the final poo I want to talk about is pretty much a special case. Well, I thought it was a special case, but then I found more than one of them, so it's no longer a special case. So this is what I would call a PMO, a board advisory, where from a senior management perspective, the board, we've got these dastardly projects who are just spending all of our money, and we really just that we're a bit disconnected from the delivery teams and what they're doing. And so we have a kind of a board advisor. So I've called them a PMO director, but it's a bit of a misnomer really. And they often actually are probably called a portfolio director. They'll call themselves as opposed to a PMO director. And it's not that they do portfolio direction, but they help and facilitate portfolio prioritization, and they provide a level of assurance on behalf of the senior team. And I always remember we had a great guy who used to do this for us several years ago. We used to get invited for tea, a cup of tea, and then they would just kind of talk about the project. And then, you know, that kind of, if I'd said, oh, and you know, and I'm really struggling because Lindsay's team aren't giving me the resource I'm after, then you would see kind of 2 days later, Lindsay might get offered a cup of tea, and Lindsay might say, you know, Eileen's requests for my resources are completely unreasonable. And the next thing you know, you'd both be holed up in front and say, right, what's the issue between you, and how do we get it sorted? So sometimes it's quite open. And other times it's interesting in terms of kind of how that information gets back. But typically they are highly respected by the board, and they're not often a kind of a board director, but they've kind of worked very closely with the board, and they're the types of people who do special projects, is where this kind of board advisory. Now, the problem is with kind of them, you're definitely, if you're kind of fulfilling this role, or you've got somebody in your organisation who does this, there's a definite, you've got them tattooed on your forehead. I always remember kind of in a podcast I was listening to, even though we might not see that when we look in the mirror, when people look at you, if you're doing that role, you're definitely one of them. So really trying to get how, you know, that information is a real kind of skill. But also when you're doing that role, because you're remote from the kind of the delivery, you've actually got limited influence on how projects are actually delivered. So, you know, you're really kind of struggling in terms of actually kind of doing things differently. So a lot of it is kind of raising awareness and trying to support the escalation of problems and issues, and trying to kind of facilitate those things to get them sorted. And so interestingly for these ones, we're not going to be engaging with the project managers necessarily and the project teams. I think when we're working at this level, we've got a much better chance of actually engaging with the project sponsors, because and starting to recognise that sponsor's role in actually driving the right behaviours and getting them to start taking some accountability for the issues and the risks associated with their project. And again, around from a sponsor's level, saying just recognising the sponsor may not necessarily want a very detailed project plan, may not necessarily want to see a detailed project report on a regular basis. And so actually kind of working with the sponsors, again, it's about this kind of driving some consistency. So just recommend the sponsors have oversight through a kind of a high level life cycle that can be consistent across the organisation, and some key milestones. So at least we're starting to kind of recognise the role of the sponsor in starting to drive how projects are delivered on behalf of the organisation. And that hopefully, once we start getting those kind of sponsors engaged, we then have got the link to the delivery teams, and we've got a bit more kind of communication kind of going up and down, and it becomes less of kind of telling tales, but actually kind of true assurance, which is providing confidence, but also ensuring that things are put in place to deal with any roadblocks or issues.
I think
Right then, so we've talked a bit about kind of various kind of POOs that we see around the organisation, and we've given some hints and tips about kind of tactics to kind of establish those POOs to be the best that they can be. But very often those POOs have aspirations, that'd be the word, aspirations to grow into a pot, or even kind of grow into kind of a bigger pot. So I thought we just kind of spend a little bit to actually talk about what's the roadmap from being a POO to a pot. And I know this is kind of where Lindsay spends her time as well, talking to kind of people who are in this position. So firstly is about engaging stakeholders, and this is about really understanding what is it the PMO is actually kind of there to do. So we talk about, you know, a vision and having the services aligned to that vision, setting up some metrics around objectives and key results areas. And again, there's lots of stuff in the library around that. And I think, Lindsay, this is where we start talking about really about building the service catalogue.
Yeah, so this is one that's become, and many people, you know, have started getting into this great big tome. But you know, for many people will probably not know that we're going to be kicking off something, and you'll see us working more on this because of the things that have changed over the years about, you know, have a service-based approach. But what is this, Aileen? What is a service catalog?
What it's an original piece of work that was done by Stuart Dixon, who basically kind of spent 5 years just writing down all of the things he'd done as working in a PMO, and we've built up a kind of a service catalogue. So it's an insight in terms of what services can be provided by a PMO. Now, we would never expect any PMO to deliver all of those services, and I think what we start to see as kind of POOs get a little bit more confidence and a little bit more credibility, we've talked a bit about kind of driving a level of consistency, is actually starting articulating a case of this is what we do as a PMO. Now, in a perfect world, in a textbook land, as I like to say, what we would have is a service catalogue of the list of things that we deliver. We would be resourced up to say, well, we spend kind of 1 day a week doing this kind of service. We're resourced up to do this service takes kind of half a day a week, all of those kind of things. But in reality, a lot of POOs kind of are still very much kind of support based because they've been asked to do lots of things. But actually what they can do over time is essentially what Stuart did, not necessarily 500 pages, but actually start saying, well, these are all of the things that I've done. And so perhaps if I'm asked to do it again, I've got some record of kind of what that looks like, what the expectation is of the customer of that service, what kind of data, where I'm going to get it from. So actually you're building up your own kind of manual of how to do things. And the reason why the service catalogue book is so good is because actually you can get your starter for 10 off there. So, you know, you can look through and say, well, actually, somebody's asked me to set up a risk management framework. What does that look like? What's involved? Well, actually, in the service catalogue, you've got that documented. If you've got other PMOs in your organisation, you can go and ask what they've got in their service catalogue back to kind of steal with zeal and share and reuse. So this concept of building a service catalogue, we're still probably not at the position where we can refuse to do things or say this is all that we can do, but actually we're starting to drive that level of consistency, because alongside that service catalogue is our PMO operations handbook.
It's more a case of it's not no, it's a not yet.
Yes, or you know, kind of, and that goes back to when we were talking about kind of building up our own knowledge and understanding of what can be in.
And then this is interesting with this as well is that obviously service catalogues become scalable. So, you know, if you can be working in a pool today and in 5 years' time working in a completely different organisation that's a massive PMO and it's still a service catalogue there. You know, it's still it's just the expanding of services and things. So
I think the other thing as well, the great thing about being a POO is when you're building your service catalogue, when somebody asks you, when you perhaps go for another job and say, well, actually, this is the services I've done, this is what I'm capable of doing. So which is a kind of a great start for your own personal kind of capability. So I've got a bit about recruit with care. So this is an interesting one. As we go from a POO to a POT, what kind of person do I want to come and sit alongside me, sit under me, or be above me? That's always an interesting one. So what kind of person am I looking at? Because one of the challenges, as we all always know when we're doing recruitment or when we're applying for jobs, is that job titles are all over the place, aren't they? There's no kind of consistent. But you've done a lot of recruitment, Lindsay, in terms of kind of what's your view of kind of moving from a POO to a POT? Who would you want? Would you want a consultant? Would you want a full-time person? Where do you go with that?
I think generally what we, you know, obviously with different PMOs out there, different, you know, reasons why they've been set up and everything else, but also timescales of how quickly, you know, an organisation is wanting to get things in place, and you know, so it really does depend. But I think what we see a lot of, because of, you know, PMOs have grown up substantially over the last 20 odd years, so people have been in the field for, you know, there's some really good people out there with, you know, knowledge and wisdom, and you know, to come in from an external point of view, not necessarily talking consulting firms, because then that's like, you know, we're talking big pound signs.
We're talking good contractors.
We're talking good contractors or independent consultants, and you know, they're certainly there to not just to come in and to take over and to be above you, but to do it alongside you. And
typically they're the kind of people who've been in like 4 or 5 or 6 different PMOs who recognise how things can be tailored,
and are really good at keeping it simple, because they have seen things, you know, like she said, if you've been in many places, you've found that simple route through, and that is half the battle with this stuff. As she said, it's like it's best practices, a lot of it, but actually it's the realism, and you also need somebody that has kind of been there and done it, because you know, this is the nature of PMO, is that there is not one size that will fit all. You can't take something off the shelf and just stick it in your organisation and hope it works. So that's a really good one. But equally, you know, there are a lot of people out there that you know, if you yourself are quite inexperienced, you know, you might want to bring somebody else on that, again, from a permanent point of view, but generally look at the permanent route when you kind of know which way you're heading, because you want to bring in somebody on that permanent basis
and grow together.
That's yeah, absolutely.
And I think at this point we're still in a position where we want people who have got generic PMO competence, haven't you, rather than kind of specific stuff, because you're still, even when there's kind of 2 or 3 of you, you're still going to be called on to do a bit of everything, and it will take a while to kind of move from a kind of support based to service based. One of the things we talk about or one of the challenges we get when we talk about service based PMOs is, but what happens if one of our customers comes and asks us to do something different? Surely we should be kind of customer centric and do what they want us to do, and that's fine. So what you might find is that kind of 3 days a week you're absolutely kind of service based, we've got kind of specific activities that need to be taken, but actually we've got 2 days a week where actually we can do all of this other stuff. So you still want people who are happy to do a kind of a mixture of all of those different elements, and recognize that actually you're going to have to spend some of your time building the PMO, not just doing PMO. So anybody who's got experience of kind of development templates and processes, and absolutely critical, I mean, we talk about it all the time, but behaviors and soft skills are really kind of what it's all about.
And if you, again, it comes down to your own experience level, you've got to think about where, you know, you're going to get that confidence as well. You know, so when it is coming to recruiting, you know, you've got to be absolutely in that interview, because sometimes that's not the case. But you absolutely do need to be, because it is a very, you know, you're going to have a feel for this person, whether you're going to be able to work with them, because, you know, taking it from, you know, from the levels, it's going to be tough.
Absolutely. You need somebody who you get on with. You can't, you know, having two independent siloed souls who sit in a PMO is just not going to work.
No. Loads of stuff there that we could talk about further.
So the final bit I want to talk about, or we're going to talk about, is this kind of roadmap from pot to infinity. What I mean from that is kind of we're moving up from being kind of a 2 or 3 person PMO to something a little bit bigger, or actually we're starting to recognise that we actually want more than one PMO across the organisation. And this is where we start. And again, it's kind of talked about in P3O, where we have kind of 3 different kind of, because I was there today, 3 functional areas where we've got strategic planning, delivery support, or centre of excellence. And again, we might think about starting to recruit or appoint specialists. So we may, you know, we may have really got to grips with risk management, and there's a lot of support required, and we want to link into organisational kind of risk management. And so we appoint somebody who may not necessarily do that kind of risk management full time, but actually, so I say, Lindsay, you're still the generalist, but actually you're going to take the lead on any work we need around risk management. So if somebody wants to run a risk management workshop, guess who's doing it? It's Lindsay. But somebody else might be doing the tools, in which case they're the person who we have problem with tools. So this is where we start establishing and recognizing the different purposes of the different elements of kind of a PMO, and starting to kind of do an organization structure around that. And I really I still love Excel, and I know there's lots of tools providers out there who would argue, you know, you should never use Excel, it's kind of just out. But we know, and I always think when finance stop using Excel, I'm happy to preach PMO to stop using Excel, but until such time that happens, I'm happy that we keep Excel here in the PMO. But when we start growing and having kind of multiple PMOs and different purposes, this is, to me, is when we start thinking about, well, having some integrated tools, and potentially now we've got kind of best practice established, that we actually kind of start looking at some kind of third-party tools to try and help us kind of even create kind of more kind of formality. And we can spend our time, rather than spend all of that time kind of pulling all of the data together, we can continue to do those kind of value-adding roles. And we were talked at PMO Hot House last week, you know, kind of all of these people who say kind of AI is going to get rid of the PMO roles. It's not, it's just going to change them. And again, getting a tool can take some of that kind of data crunching away and some of the manual input away, that allows us to do some of the more specialist roles.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and I think one of the things that many people is that you'll hear them talking about the hub and spoke, which you know, when you feel like you are literally the PMO-One, you're like, what? You know, where am I? But typically, you know, they probably feel like a spoke. But you know, one day it could be going into being the hub.
Absolutely.
You know, so this is the career possibilities. This is what we were saying about how actually being in this kind of position can be a challenge. Yes, it's like, what on earth you got yourself into? But you know, it's not the only kind of PMO, but you are going to learn so much because of the opportunity you've got to, you know, there's you're doing a lot of it.
Well, back to the roadmap to infinity, yes, in terms of where you might be.
Indeed.
So that's what we wanted to talk about. We hope you found it useful. If you do have any questions, I realise that you're going to get the recording of this. Come on to our LinkedIn page, or go to our website. Give us a ring, and we shall fill out a form on our website, and we'll get back to you with any questions. Thank you for watching.